Imagine stepping into the streets of ancient Rome. In front of you stands a legionary. What's the first detail that draws your attention? Most likely it's the gleaming armor, the sturdy shield, and that helmet topped with a striking red crest. Now picture this soldier walking toward you and saying, "Friend, do you really think I'm wearing all this just to look impressive?" Popular culture has fixed this image in our minds, the Roman soldier covered in shining metal, ready for war. But the reality was much deeper. A legionary's outfit was not just a random set of clothing and armor. It was a carefully designed system, every single piece made with a purpose. The Romans were masters of detail in military affairs, and their approach to clothing was no exception. Their gear was created to survive exhausting marches, brutal combat, and every type of weather Rome's vast empire could throw at them. Stay with this video until the end, because you'll see how Roman sandals, yes, sandals, were not just footwear, but also weapons. Let's start with the foundation of a legionary's clothing, the tunic. This was the soldier's everyday garment, simple but practical, most often made from wool. Its length usually reached down to the knees. Wool wasn't chosen by accident. It was durable, it wickeded moisture, and it provided warmth in cold conditions. Contrary to modern myths, not all Roman tunics were red. The color depended on what dyes were available, or the traditions of a specific unit. The most common version was plain, undyed wool, usually white, since it was easier to clean and maintain. Beneath the tunic, soldiers often wore a loincloth. This extra layer offered protection and comfort, especially during long marches. But here comes a question many people ask. Why didn't the Romans, who were so advanced in so many ways, use trousers? The answer is simple. They considered pants to be barbarian clothing, typical of Germanic and Gallic tribes. For Romans, a tunic with a loincloth was enough. Still, in colder climates, legionaries reluctantly adopted woolen trousers. These were loose-fitting, not tight like modern ones, and were worn only when absolutely necessary. Around the waist, every legionary fastened a leather belt called a cingulum. This wasn't just for holding up clothing. It carried weapons like the sword and dagger and had strips decorated with metal plates. The more plates a soldier had, the higher his standing. The cingulum symbolized rank, readiness for battle, and served almost like an ID card that showed who the soldier was. Another essential item was the sagum, a heavy wool cloak. This kept out the cold, rain, and wind, and could even serve as a blanket at night. It was usually rectangular and fastened with a brooch known as a fibula. Cloaks were often dark red or brown, colors that helped hide dirt from constant marching. Beneath the tunic and sagum, soldiers could also wear a tunica. Interior, a thin linen undergarment. This made the wool tunic more comfortable, prevented chafing, and was easier to wash. Together, the under-tunic, main tunic, and cloak created a system of layers that kept legionaries comfortable from the deserts of North Africa to the icy winds of Britain. Despite how simple this clothing looks, it required care. Legionaries had to keep their tunics clean and their cloaks in good condition. Torn or dirty clothing wasn't tolerated and could lead to punishment. Washing clothes was tough too. Soap wasn't available, so soldiers scrubbed their tunics in rivers using sand or ash as cleaning agents. It was tiring and time-consuming, but essential to prevent disease and keep discipline. Now let's turn to the image everyone knows, the armor. The most famous armor of the Roman army was the Lorica segmentata. This was made of wide iron strips joined by leather straps and metal clasps. It offered excellent protection against slashes while still letting soldiers move freely. Another, widely used type was Lorica hamata, or chainmail. This armor was heavier, but it was flexible, long-lasting, and easier to maintain than the segmentata. There was also Lorica squamata, scale armor made of small overlapping plates sewn to a fabric or leather backing. It was especially popular, with officers and cavalry who valued its mobility. Each piece of armor required enormous skill to make. Early on, they were very expensive, but as Rome expanded, mass production made them more accessible. Armor was more than protection. It was part of a soldier's identity, something he learned to wear as naturally as his own skin. Besides these main types, other protective gear included breastplates, usually worn by centurions and standard-bearers. These could be made of iron, bronze, or hardened leather. Some soldiers also used greaves to protect the shins and manici, bracers, to guard the arms. These were more common among officers and gladiators, and they provided a real advantage in close combat. Underneath the armor, legionaries wore the subarmalis, a padded vest made of layers of linen or wool. This prevented the armor from rubbing into the skin and absorbed some of the impact from blows. Without it, injuries and abrasions were inevitable. Altogether, a legionary's gear, including armor, helmet, shield, and weapons, could weigh around 25 kg. Roman engineers worked hard to make this load as light and effective as possible, experimenting with alloys and refining techniques to balance strength with mobility. For the soldiers, armor wasn't just equipment, it was their second skin, designed with precision for survival. But there's one piece of equipment that might surprise you as being just as important as armor: the sandals, known as caligae. At first glance, they seem like ordinary leather footwear. But these sandals were one of Rome's greatest military innovations. Made of tough leather, their soles were reinforced with dozens, sometimes hundreds, of iron hobnails. These nails gave grip on any terrain, mud, gravel, or rock, and made the sandals extremely durable. The caligae had another hidden advantage. On marches where soldiers covered about 20-25 kilometers a day, the hobnails acted like tiny massage points, improving circulation and reducing blisters. This simple design meant soldiers could march longer distances with less fatigue. Every pair was custom fitted, and soldiers took pride in maintaining them. Even more fascinating, these sandals became a mark of identity. Only full Roman citizens serving in the legions could wear them. Shoemakers or caligari were highly respected artisans, using the best oxhide leather and passing their craft down for generations. Nails were carefully placed to last for years, and when they wore down, they could be replaced, saving time and resources. There was even a psychological aspect. A kick from a caliga with its sharp hobnails could badly injure an enemy, making the footwear itself a weapon. The design was so effective that Emperor Augustus ordered standardized versions to be mass-produced for the army. Despite standardization, each pair still had to meet strict quality standards. Without footwear like the caligae, the Roman army could never have moved with such speed and efficiency. Soldiers would not have survived endless marches across continents, from Spain to the Middle East. These sandals were proof of Roman ingenuity, functional, durable, and vital for the empire's expansion. Every detail of the Roman soldier's gear, from the tunic to the armor to the sandals, had a role. Nothing was left to chance. Together, these items turned ordinary men into one of the most disciplined and effective fighting forces the world has ever seen. It was small details, like the iron nails in the soles of Roman sandals, that helped the empire endure for nearly 1,000 years. But footwear wasn't the only clever piece of Roman equipment. Perhaps the most iconic part of a legionary's gear was his helmet. The earliest Roman helmets, such as the Montefortino, were quite simple. They had a rounded or conical shape with small cheek guards for basic protection. Over time, as Rome's enemies became stronger and battles more complex, helmets evolved. They developed into more advanced designs like the Imperial Gallic style. These newer helmets had broader cheek guards and a strong neck guard to provide far better defense. Many helmets also carried plumes or crests. The colors varied, sometimes indicating rank, sometimes marking a soldier's cohort. Beyond protection, helmets were status symbols. Crafted from iron or bronze, they were polished until they gleamed in the sun. On the battlefield, this shine was more than decoration. The reflection of sunlight could momentarily blind enemies, while the uniform glitter of thousands of helmets created the impression of a single, unstoppable force. The psychological effect was as powerful as the physical protection. Early helmets like the Montefortino were cheap and easy to make, allowing Rome to arm huge numbers of soldiers. But as metallurgy improved and enemies became tougher, Roman engineers created masterpieces like the Imperial Gallic. These were strong, carefully fitted, and practical for long campaigns. Blacksmiths, known as fabbri, were the skilled craftsmen behind these helmets. Forging them was no simple task. The helmet had to be durable but not overly heavy, and comfortable enough for a soldier to wear for hours on end. Though we don't know the names of individual armorers, their work still impresses us today. Many helmets found by archaeologists remain in excellent condition, proof of their craftsmanship and Rome's commitment to equipping its legions with the best possible gear. Helmets also had a crucial role in communication. A centurion, for example, wore a crest that ran sideways across his helmet. This made him stand out on the battlefield so his men could spot him and follow orders, even in the chaos of combat. Ordinary soldiers might go without plumes altogether, keeping the ranks disciplined and organized. Now that we've covered the helmet, let's move on to something even larger, the shield. And here's a question for you. Do you know why Roman shields were so big? Were they perhaps designed to double as dinner tables? Stick around because we'll get to the real answer. The Roman shield, or scutum, was one of the most important tools in a legionary's kit. Tall, rectangular, and slightly curved, it could cover nearly the entire body. Constructed from several layers of wood glued together, then covered in leather, the scutum was both strong and surprisingly light. At the very center was a metal boss called the umbo. This wasn't just for protecting the hand, it could also be used offensively, smashing into an opponent to stun or knock him back. Each shield was decorated with painted emblems. These weren't random designs. They represented the soldier's legion or cohort, often with symbols of gods, animals, or mythological figures. Such markings gave soldiers pride and helped create unity. To the enemy, seeing hundreds of identical shields advancing was terrifying. The scutum's curved design was no accident. It allowed soldiers to lock their shields together, forming the famous testudo, or tortoise formation. In this wall of shields, legionaries were almost impossible to break through, protected from arrows and sword strikes alike. The curvature also caused enemy blows to glance off, rather than landing directly. A typical scutum weighed about 10 kilo. Edges were reinforced, with iron or bronze preventing splitting, and the outer layer was painted after being covered with canvas or leather. Training with such a shield required incredible strength and discipline. Soldiers practiced endlessly to move in unison, because the shield was not just protection, it was the heart of Roman battlefield tactics. Now let's look at the legionaries' primary weapons. The short sword, known as the gladius, was about 50 to 60 centimeters long. With two sharp edges and a strong point, it was perfect for stabbing in tight formations. Roman soldiers would use their shields for defense, then thrust the gladius into vulnerable spots. The hilt was usually made of wood, bone, or ivory, shaped for a secure grip. The pommel, often round like a ball or shaped like a mushroom, balanced the blade. Regulations required legionaries to wear the gladius on the right side, making it easy to draw during battle. More than just a weapon, the gladius became the symbol of a Roman soldier's identity. Alongside it, soldiers carried a dagger called the pugio. This smaller weapon, about 25 centimeters in length, was worn on the left side. It was the last line of defense if the gladius was lost or useless. But it also served many practical purposes, cutting food, repairing gear, or working on fortifications. Both the gladius and the pugio were forged from high-quality steel. Blacksmiths hardened, tempered, and sharpened the blades with great skill. For soldiers, maintaining their weapons was part of daily life. A sharp blade could mean the difference between life and death, so every legionary devoted time to its care. The brilliance of the gladius lay in its practicality. Longer swords might have looked impressive, but in the close quarters fighting of Roman tactics, they were useless. The short length of the gladius allowed soldiers to strike quickly, avoid hitting their own comrades, and then return instantly to defense. Many of Rome's victories can be credited to this simple yet devastating weapon. But of course, none of this equipment, tunics, cloaks, armor, helmets, shields, swords, or sandals, came out of nowhere. Behind the Roman army was an entire network of skilled workers. Woolen tunics and cloaks were woven in workshops or even households. Leather for sandals, or caligae, was prepared by tanners before being handed to shoemakers, who built the footwear and hammered in the nails that made them durable. These sandals weren't just made in bulk. Every pair had to meet quality standards because the endurance of entire campaigns depended on reliable footwear. Metal armor, helmets, and weapons were produced in state-run armories. Blacksmiths, metallurgists, and artisans worked under strict supervision, smelting iron and bronze, hammering plates, and assembling pieces according to standardized patterns. Uniformity was vital. If a piece of equipment broke in battle, it had to be replaced quickly, and every item needed to fit seamlessly with the rest. Even the soldiers themselves took part in the process. They repaired, cleaned, and sharpened their own gear, making sure everything was ready for the next march or battle. Rome's army wasn't just disciplined in combat. It was supported by an entire industrial system that turned raw materials into the most advanced military equipment of its time. Helmets, shields, swords, and even sandals, all of these pieces worked together to create not just protection, but power. And it was through this combination of practicality, discipline, and attention to detail that Rome built an empire that lasted nearly 1,000 years. Every Roman legion had its own workshop, known as a fabrica, where soldier craftsmen repaired and produced weapons, armor, tents, and even siege machines. Thanks to these workshops, damage could be fixed on the spot and equipment replaced without waiting for supplies from Rome. Soldiers with special skills, such as blacksmithing, carpentry, or leatherworking, were often relieved from regular combat duties. These men were called immunes, military technicians whose work made the legions more independent and capable of operating far from the empire's core. The economy of Rome itself was tied closely to the army. Massive private workshops and state-owned fabricae supplied soldiers with gear under enormous government contracts. This constant demand encouraged innovation in crafts and technology throughout the empire. New mines were opened for iron and copper, and smithing techniques improved steadily. Because the Roman army was the single largest consumer in the empire, its needs shaped the market. Cities near military bases became industrial hubs. In provinces like Germany and Gaul, where legions were stationed in large numbers, local workshops flourished, especially those specializing in leather goods and weapons. But producing equipment was only half the challenge. Delivering it to the soldiers required an advanced logistics system. Raw materials like wool, hides, and metals were shipped from across the empire to production centers. Once crafted, the finished goods traveled by land and sea to warehouses, and from there, they were distributed to the legions. This supply chain was massive and required strict organization, coordination, and protection. Rome's famous military roads weren't just for marching armies. They were also designed to support this complex flow of materials and equipment. Despite strict centralization, quality was not always uniform. Different provinces sometimes used different techniques or resources. Armor made in Egypt, for example, could look and feel different from armor forged in Germany. Still, Rome enforced common standards and tight inspections to ensure that soldiers could trust their gear. Mass production never meant poor quality. On the contrary, Roman doctrine required every soldier to have full confidence in his equipment. Military gear was not just practical, it was a symbol of Roman order, power, and discipline. Rules about how uniforms were produced and worn reflected the empire's hierarchy and structure. From mining raw materials to marching onto the battlefield, everything formed part of the great military machine that allowed Rome to dominate for centuries. Because Roman soldiers served in every corner of the empire, from the deserts of Syria to the forests of Germania, their uniforms had to adapt to many climates. In hot regions, legionaries wore lighter tunics and sometimes went without armor. Heavy cloaks, known as ciums, were often used to shield the head and shoulders from the burning sun. Their footwear, the caligae, military sandals, provided excellent ventilation and rarely caused blisters, even during long marches in extreme heat. In colder regions, the uniform changed completely. Soldiers layered one or two extra tunics beneath their main garment for warmth. They wrapped their feet in cloth, or thick woolen socks called eudones, and covered their heads with wool caps. A key part of the winter kit was the sagum, a heavy cloak wrapped tightly around the shoulders and neck. It was not only warm, but also water-resistant, offering vital protection against rain and snow. Other gear was also adapted for the seasons. In winter, Soldiers wore thick felt or leather gloves to protect their hands from frostbite. Their shields could be fitted with leather covers to prevent water from freezing and weakening the wood. Lorica segmentata, the famous segmented armor, was less practical in freezing conditions because the metal became uncomfortably cold. In those climates, soldiers often switched to chainmail, Lorica hamata, or scale armor, Lorica squamata, which provided better insulation. This small adjustment made a huge difference in combat effectiveness during harsh weather. But heat could be just as dangerous as cold. In regions where temperatures soared above 40 degrees, avoiding dehydration and heat stroke was critical. Legionaries were sometimes allowed to leave part of their armor in camp to prevent overheating. Their tunics were made from light, breathable fabrics that helped the skin stay cool, and helmets were fitted with cloth pads to protect the neck from the sun. Water was carried in leather bags, and maintaining supplies during long desert marches was one of the army's highest priorities. Despite all these adaptations, illness was a constant threat. Moving between hot and cold climates often caused outbreaks of sickness that could cripple entire cohorts. To counter this, Roman doctors emphasized hygiene and nutrition, while commanders enforced rules to protect their men from extreme temperatures. During cold stops, fires were lit, and during heat waves, soldiers received extra water and salt. These simple precautions were as important as their weapons in keeping the legions strong. The Roman army's ability to adapt is best shown by comparing regions. Soldiers stationed in the damp, chilly British Isles wore heavier, water-resistant gear, while those in North Africa wore lighter tunics and cloaks designed for heat. This flexibility made the Roman military both powerful and resilient, able to fight in almost any environment. Not all soldiers dressed the same, however. The clothing and armor of officers such as centurions and legates stood out from the ranks. Centurions wore higher quality lorica, often decorated with bronze plates or silver fittings. Their helmets carried a horizontal crest of feathers, making them easy to spot during battle. They also wore greaves to protect their shins, and a vine staff called a vetus hung from their belts, symbolizing both authority and discipline. Legates, the commanders of entire legions, dressed even more impressively. While their armor was still functional, it was often decorated with silver or gold. Instead of sandals, they wore calcae, boot-like shoes that marked their status. Their cloaks were made from fine fabrics and dyed purple, a color reserved for the elite. Most importantly, the legate wore the paludamentum, a large cloak that symbolized his authority and connection to the Senate. Centurions also had other distinctive insignia. Their belts, cingulum, were wider and richly decorated, and they carried the fasces, bundles of rods representing their power to enforce discipline. Unlike common soldiers, who wore their swords on the right, centurions carried theirs on the left. This not only made drawing the weapon easier, but also highlighted their special position within the ranks. Legates and other senior officers rarely fought on the front lines. Their main responsibility was command and strategy, so their armor was often lighter and more decorative. Many wore musculata, anatomical armor shaped to resemble the human torso or chainmail. Once again, the purple paludamentum served as the most important sign of their authority. Tribunes, another class of officer, dressed somewhere between ordinary soldiers and legates. They wore white tunics with a wide purple stripe called the laticlavia. Their armor was similar to that of legates but less ornate. Their footwear, the calci patrici, marked their noble birth. While not as extravagant as the legates, tribunes still stood out, their clothing reflecting both their administrative role and elevated social standing. These visual differences in uniform weren't just decorative. They reinforced discipline and hierarchy, allowing soldiers to immediately recognize leaders in the chaos of battle. Each piece of an officer's uniform symbolized authority, duty, and status, reflecting the strict order that defined Rome's military machine. In addition to uniforms, Roman soldiers carried a surprising number of personal items. Every legionary wore a pugio, a small dagger that was both a weapon and a multi-purpose tool. They also carried a sarcina, a pack with food, water, and basic belongings, slung over the shoulder on a wooden pole. Though heavy, this pack was essential for survival on the march. Inside the sarcina were daily necessities: a small cooking pot, a spoon, and even grooming tools like razors. Romans placed great value on hygiene, and soldiers were expected to keep themselves clean even in the field. These habits contributed to discipline and morale. Legionaries also carried engineering tools. A dolabra or pickaxe was used for digging trenches, building camps, and breaking obstacles. Alongside it, they carried a fossorium, a shovel for earthworks. These tools were heavy but indispensable, allowing the legions to construct fortifications wherever they went. Each soldier also kept a loculus, a small leather satchel containing personal possessions such as money, writing materials, charms, or repair kits for clothing and footwear. Even under strict military discipline, commanders respected these small private belongings, which gave soldiers a sense of individuality and connection to home. Another common item was the sica, a small sickle used to cut grass and fodder for animals or gather edible plants. Light and practical, it showed the Romans' pragmatic approach to survival during campaigns. Taken together, these personal items show how a Roman soldier was much more than just a fighter. He was also an engineer, a builder, and a survivor. Every tool, every piece of clothing, every weapon had a specific purpose, making the Roman army one of the most effective in history. So as we've seen, the gear of a Roman soldier was far more complex than it might first appear. From the tunic to the pugio, every element was carefully designed, serving both practical needs and symbolic purposes. This combination of practicality, discipline, and organization helped Rome maintain its dominance for centuries. We hope you enjoyed exploring the world of Roman equipment. What aspect of Roman soldiers' lives would you like to learn about next? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our next video on history's most fascinating facts.